So today is a rich and powerful coming together of secular and religious observances. Passover started on Friday evening. Saturday was Transgender Day of Visibility, and today is Easter Sunday. Transgender Day of Visibility, International Transgender Day of Visibility, is a day to recognize and celebrate the accomplishments of transgender individuals. So I'd like to thank the many transgender and gender nonconforming people who serve our faith as ministers, as lay leaders, as staffers of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and as leaders in our congregations. And in particular, I'd like to hold up two ministers who have been an inspiration to my own ministry. That would be the Reverend Sunshine Jeremiah Wolf and the Reverend Michael Slack of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. These are some of the most powerful, transforming, and inspiring leaders that we have in this movement, and I am grateful to them. If Easter or Passover are part of your living tradition or that of your family or loved ones, then we wish you a happy Easter and or Passover. Let us acknowledge with gratitude the great contributions that these traditions have made to Unitarian Universalism and the themes that they celebrate that we are inheritors of. The themes of Passover and Easter resonate deeply throughout our history. Passover with the themes of justice, freedom, and self-determination, and Easter with its theme of new life and transformation through the power of love. Our worship theme for this month is healing, and so I've been thinking about, as I prepared for this service, the way in which themes of healing appear in these traditions. And Passover celebrates the Exodus story of God creating a covenant with the Jewish people and leading them out of the bondage of slavery, setting them on their way to the promised land. So the Passover story is a story of hope. It promises that in the end, no human tyranny is stronger than a people's yearning to be free. But it's primarily a story of liberation and not about healing. But as I thought about it, I thought about how before a community can even begin to heal, they must be freed from that which is harming them, from the structures which oppress them. And that certainly speaks to the realities of many marginalized communities, including here in America, where some communities and some people are exposed to the harms of discrimination or economic neglect or crime and state-sanctioned violence. And liberation can be the first step in healing by stopping the harm of that neglect. And in progressive Judaism, the striving to bring more peace and justice into the world, to liberate those communities, is understood sometimes as an expression of a concept called tikkun olam, which is the healing of the world. So in that tradition, it is understood that when we work for justice, we can all be healers. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we have many different ideas about the theology of Easter. The symbol of the resurrection itself is not central to our religious tradition, but what we have deeply woven into our thinking and practices is Jesus' vision of love and peace and humanity. And in particular, we celebrate his practice of radical hospitality, his welcoming of all people to his table, his insistence that all people are worthy of love and that all people, in his language, are God's children. It is a message that we need now more than ever. And we believe in the tremendous potential for healing that lies in that message. Jesus' ministry, of course, was a ministry of healing. Wherever he went, he healed the sick. He asked for nothing in return. He never accepted any payment. And his healing was another vehicle for his affirmation of the other person's humanity, because his healing was just as open as his table. He healed people without regard to their social standing, their religious status, whether they were in his community or some other community where there may even have been conflict. He healed women and children, Roman soldiers, slaves, the socially unacceptable, the ritually impure, the outcast. So just as he accepted everyone to his table, he accepted everyone into the circle of his care and concern. And he placed his hands on them and said, "You are loved, you are beloved, you are worthy of healing." And he taught his disciples to do the same. And in this way, through the act of healing, he communicated the great worth and dignity of those people that he ministered to. He made the invisible visible through his love and attention. And I've been thinking a lot about the power of visibility lately, of the spiritual and physical impact, the healing impact of being seen and knowing that you are seen, and that in being seen you are counted, you are valued, you matter. Last July there was a movie that came out called Wonder Woman. Maybe you've seen it. It's about Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman is this super strong, ultra fierce Amazonian goddess who lives on an island of only women. They're warriors and they're like in splendid isolation from the rest of the world, and they just hang out like doing warrior stuff and being cool and having a good time. And in the movie, Wonder Woman gets pulled into the carnage of World War I and World War I trench warfare because plot devices. And in one of the most thrilling moments of the movie, she goes over the top of the trench and she single-handedly leads a charge across no man's land directly into German machine gun fire. And as she's leading this charge, she's like deflecting all these bullets with her godlike reflexes, her goddess-like reflexes. And she's got a shield, and she defeats the soldiers, and she saves a lot of women and children. And it's all shot in slow motion. And there's like this thrilling martial music, like pounding your eardrums, boom, 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 boom. And there's explosions going all over the place. Then this electric guitar starts wailing. It's like all set up to be like maximally awesome. And at the center of all this awesomeness is Wonder Woman. Now, who here guessed I'd be talking about Wonder Woman in the sermon today? But what caught my attention about this movie as a cultural phenomenon is the number of women who I read online saying, when Wonder Woman went over the top and when she charged across no man's land into that machine gun fire, I started crying in the movie theater. I started crying because I didn't know until that moment that this was something that I needed to see. Some of them didn't even like superhero movies. This is not my kind of movie, and I found myself weeping in the theater because I didn't know that I needed to see that. And then some other women said, I've been waiting my whole life to see that, and I'm so thrilled that I finally did. The director, by the way, is a woman, Patty Jenkins. The movie made $1 bajillion. That's an estimate. And incidentally and relatedly, until this last weekend, the #1 movie in America, 5 weeks in a row, was a movie called Black Panther. Superhero movie set in the fictional African kingdom of Wakanda with a black superhero at the center, with a story entirely focused on the lives of a group of powerful and self-determined Africans and African Americans, an almost entirely black cast, with a black director, Ryan Coogler. And this movie has utterly smashed expectations at the box office, just pummeled them worldwide. Forbes reported yesterday that Black Panther has now passed $1.25 billion in ticket sales. That's a real number, not a made-up one. And Vanity Fair reports that Wakanda Forever, the crossed-arms salute, is now showing up everywhere in popular culture, on playgrounds, in everyday life, in schools, at sporting events. Representation matters. Visibility matters. So Transgender Day of Visibility understands the healing power of being seen and valued. And I don't mean healing power in a metaphorical sense, right? The stress of constant exposure to cultural forces like transphobia or racism or misogyny, these stresses are toxic to the body, and over time, they do damage. So I'm talking about healing, right? Love heals, but it also heals. And as it heals, it opens up new possibilities for more healing. The Reverend Robin Bartlett reminds us that the maxim, hurt people, has a corollary, and that is that healed people heal people. Healing takes time and faithfulness and persistence, and it takes a lot of support, but it is possible. And in this regard, in regards to what healing requires, the idea of the resurrection as it appears in the Easter story, as we turn to another one of our traditions today, as it mirrors other healing acts described by Jesus, attributed to Jesus, it has a positive and a negative aspect. And I'm treating the resurrection here as a myth or a sacred story, not to be dismissive of anyone who believes in its literal truth, but just to create the largest possible space for a conversation because so many different perspectives are in this room. So the positive aspect of this sacred story is that we are reminded by the story that real transformation is a possibility in life. Transformation of hearts, transformation of societies, sometimes even transformation of bodies, and this can lead to profound healing. In the story, the moment at which they believe that everything is lost is the moment at which some new possibility is breaking through into the world, some undreamt of hope that is going to be realized, that new life is taking hold. And we need to be reminded that the possibilities of the world are larger than we always understand. But the negative aspect of the story is that transformation and healing rarely looks like or functions like this mythical resurrection concept. The sudden replacement of the old with the new, the perfect transfiguration, the sudden ascension to this greater state of health and wholeness. Healing in actuality, whether we're talking about personal healing or societal healing, is a process, and it is often a long and slow and partial process. Our healed bodies are not the same as the bodies that we had before we undertook the journey of illness. They are touched and they are altered by that journey. So when we talk about changing society or changing the world, when we talk about healing, it is true that remarkable new possibilities for change can open up very unexpectedly. So you can consider the Me Too movement, the March for Our Lives that just happened the other weekend, or that there's a boy who wears dresses now in the new season of Roseanne, and all of the adults decide, get this, just to love and support him. But always when we step into the new, these new spaces of possibility, we carry the old with us. There is no such thing as a clean break in history. Healing is also always complicated and partial. And that's one reason I like the Passover story, turning to our third tradition, because the Passover story is a very different picture of change. In the Passover story, the Hebrew people are enslaved in Egypt for generations and generations, so long they've almost forgotten what freedom is. And then very suddenly they are free. Something new and totally unexpected has transformed their collective story. But what follows next is the long trek to the promised land. Because the moment of liberation, when everything changes overnight, is followed by these decades of wandering. They get lost in the desert. They argue with their leaders. They lose confidence. They have doubts and fears. At times, they even struggle to remember, was it really so bad under the pharaohs after all? Can we go back to Egypt? They forget their God who freed them, and they worship more convenient, more seductive, more glitzy and glamorous idols. So in the Passover story, the moment of liberation is the beginning of the work, not the end of the work. It is the beginning of the story, not the climax of the story. And in the process of journeying together, they establish structures that they need to sustain themselves as a community. They make collective commitments and they form deep communal values that they return to again and again and again to see themselves through that time in the desert. And this is the very human story of what liberation looks like and what healing requires. Hope and commitment and persistence, but also community support and this deep well of love and caring that we can return to again and again. Community support is so critical and so often lacking. And we would all be better healers and have a healthier society if we learned to draw on this support and to create this support more effectively. So I had these different themes sort of tumbling around in my head for this service about renewal and possibility and persistence, hope and healing and visibility. And if you take that mix and you throw in like a dash of spring and some good old-fashioned UU earth-based spirituality, a little nature worship, Easter has deep, deep pagan roots after all. Well, what came into my head was the old Harry Belafonte song, Turn the World Around. And specifically, I was thinking of that time he sang it on The Muppet Show back in 1979. And who here guessed I'd be talking about The Muppet Show in the sermon today? And the lyrics go, we come from the fire, living in the fire, go back to the fire, turn the world around. There's that idea of energy and transformation, living in the fire, and maybe the fire for you represents spirit or the creative power of love or intellect and imagination or the energies of the earth or the sacred feminine. However you see it, fire is that change agent. But change is not a one-time act, it's a process. So there is that need for return and renewal and recommitment. Go back to the fire. And it is in this complete process that we find hope and healing. Turn the world around. It is a new day, a new earth, a new beginning. And then there are lines in the song where we pick up that theme of visibility. Do you know who I am? Do I know who you are? See we one another clearly? Do we know who we are? Now, on The Muppet Show, Harry Belafonte explained how he came to write the song. He said, I discovered the song in Africa. I was in a country called Guinea. I went deep into the interior of the country, and in a little village, I met with a storyteller. The storyteller went way back in African tradition and African mythology and began to tell the story about the fire, the sun, the water, the earth. He pointed out the whole of these things put together turns the world around, that all of us are here for a very short time. And in that time, there isn't really any difference in us if we take the time to understand each other. He says, the question is, do I know who you are or who I am? Do we care about each other? Because if we do, he says, together we can turn the world around. So on this conjunction of Easter and Passover and Transgender Day of Visibility, may we take the time to see one another clearly. May all people feel seen and loved, and may it be our collective commitment to care for one another, for ourselves, and for our earth. As best we can, let us be healed people who heal people. We know that our commitment is imperfect. We know that we will get lost in the desert, that sometimes our energy will flag and our spirit will falter. When it does, may we remember that we have one another, we have this chalice, and we can go back to the fire together. Blessed be, and amen.